Hi everybody, the video today is all about separation issues in dogs, and in particular we'll be talking about the symptoms and causes of the behaviour. I'm Claude from Canine IQ. If you're a regular visitor to the YouTube channel, really appreciate your support, so a humble thank you. If you're new to the channel and you want to stay in touch with all the information that I provide, please hit the subscribe and notify button, that way you don't miss anything that I post. Hope you find the video enjoyable. So let's look at the symptoms of separation-related behaviour. Effectively, separation-related behaviour is made evident if the dog exhibits any of the following symptoms, despite the behaviour being normal. Now, all of the behavioural response that the dog is giving you are perfectly normal because separation-related behaviour is perfectly normal. However, not seeing any of the symptoms doesn't mean that the dog isn't suffering from separation-related behaviour. It just means that we haven't put the dog into that situation that actually triggers the dog to show you separation-related behaviour. If I miss somebody and I'm next to that person, you don't see the fact that I'm missing that person. If that person is not around or I can't get access to that person, then you will see the cause and effect of me missing that person. So effectively, these will be listed in progressive order in terms of intensity. So the first one that we need to understand is that dogs typically follow certain people from room to room, often in a state of agitation. So if your dog has got a particular attachment to you or one of your partners, if you're walking around or that person is walking around the house and the dog has got a strong connection with that person, there is every likelihood that that dog will follow that person from room to room. And if they go into the bathroom, the dog might be sitting outside the bathroom door. Or if you've just stepped out for a minute and come back, the dog gets a little bit excited because you've actually come back. That's effectively the entry level or the starting point to separation related behaviors. And trust me, it gets significantly worse from here. Okay. The next stage is unease and clear distress when left outside or in another room. So if we take this dog and we put the dog outside, or we lock it in a bathroom or a laundry, the dog will display clear signs of distress, i.e. barking, howling, whining, scratching, in order to get out of that environment and back to where we are. These are perfectly normal behaviors. It's just that they are now clear signs that the dog is not comfortable being on its own and it needs to be with us. So we need to start to address the issue. Now we start to get a little bit more complicated. So the dogs start pacing and panting before being left alone for any long periods of time. Now, most of us, if we've got dogs that are predominantly indoor dogs, dogs are really good at picking patterns. So they know exactly when you're going to work, they know when you're leaving for a few minutes, they know when you're going to the gym, simply because we have certain rituals. Now, human beings are routine or ritualistic in terms of their process, and dogs look for patterns. And unfortunately, those patterns tell the dog in flashing neon sign that things are about to happen that the dog can't control. And that puts the dog into a clear and obvious state of distress. So picking up car keys, even perfume that people wear during the week, as opposed to perfume or aftershave that they were on a weekend, that triggers the dog into actually thinking that certain things are going to be happening that will potentially leave the dog alone. And the dog is clearly distressed, and hence displaying behaviors like pacing and panting beforehand. Okay, now it starts to get a little bit more complicated. So what happens in that situation? The dog is now clearly distressed. So what could be potentially progressing to is destructive behavior both inside and outside the house. So if we put the dog outside because it wants to come inside, all it wants to do is to try and get back inside the house. So it will start potentially doing things like scratching at the screen doors or chewing at doors, or trying to get through windows to get inside the house. All of these are pretty freaky problems. And then if we've got a dog that's potentially left inside the house because nobody's there, the dog is starting to distress. So it's running around and it might be destroying pillows, cushions, chewing on furniture, cables, all sorts of stuff. Now, all of these behaviors that are destructive are done by the dog to remove the pressure of being left alone, and they are quite dysfunctional. So the more the dogs do it, the more they think that it's actually removing the pressure. However, it's actually making the problem significantly worse. So what we need to do later on in the context of dog training is change how the dog manages that pressure or that stress. If the dogs get to this next level, which is effectively urinating or defecating on your bed or places that smell of you, we've started to become a little bit more chronic in our behavior, meaning it's more significant in terms of separation, and potentially it may be down the track that we need some kind of intervention, definitely training, but potentially maybe even medication. Because, like I mentioned earlier, human odor plays a significant part in getting this connection between humans and dogs. Dogs will tend to go onto things that smell of us, couches or beds, laundry hampers, shoes and socks. And in most cases, they will wee or poo, either urinate or defecate on those pieces of equipment in order to get attention and to do things that actually remove pressure. Again, this is another one of these dysfunctional behaviors that the dogs are doing to actually feel a bit better, but it makes the behavior significantly worse. The next part is when we put the dogs outside and they no longer go through the part of destructive behavior. It's what we call obsessive licking of windows. So they're more compulsive or obsessive behaviors. These are behaviors that become what we call self-rewarding. The dogs do these a lot and actually remove the pressure more, but actually make the problem significantly worse. So in the scheme of things, we are really starting to get into the realm of incredibly dysfunctional behaviors. And these are a major problem in itself because they're very, very hard to interrupt. And often by the time the dogs get to this stage, it's medication time. The last part, and this is where we definitely do not want to head with our dogs, where the licking of windows actually ends up becoming what we call obsessive licking or chewing on itself in the form of self-mutilation. Now, when dogs get to this stage, self-mutilation is definitely a medication situation because we need to remove the distress that the dog is feeling. And obedience training or behavior modification at this point in time has very little benefit. In conjunction with medication, there may be some kind of benefit that we can draw from it. But initially, medication may be needed just to take the edge off the behavior, to get the dog's distress levels down a little bit and put the dog into a different mental state to be able to be receptive to dog training. Without that, at this point in time, it makes it very, very difficult. The symptoms above are all based on dependency and have a gradual progression in terms of severity, like I've been saying. So it's difficult to know where the dog is within the spectrum of behavioral response. And this is the problem that's often evident with separation-related behavior. Effectively, from the beginning bit where the dogs are following you from room to room, right the way through to the end stage where the dogs are self-mutilating, it's effectively a slippery slope that we don't know where the dog is in that situation until the dog exhibits those behaviors. As I mentioned before, if we're always in and around the dog, we don't see these behaviors, so we don't notice that there's separation issues at hand. It's only when we remove access to us that these behaviors come to the surface, and the dog then exhibits certain responses to those triggers. Separation-related behavior is a very detailed subject. So now that we've covered the symptoms, we need to look at effectively the triggers causing separation-related behavior. So triggers can best be described as anything that causes any behavior to occur. So effectively, they're the starting point that gives birth to a certain behavioral response. And it's important to understand that triggers effectively could be anything that the dog perceives as a starting point. It could be a noise, it could be a movement, it could be an element of clothing, it could be a behavior that we're doing, it could be anything. Okay. So triggers causing separation-related behavior are extensive and in each and every situation can vary depending on the following. Breed of dog. Okay, now this is a really controversial point, but it's important to understand this. Some breeds have got a greater potential based on their genetic resilience. So all dogs effectively have been bred selectively to achieve certain results. As a result of this breeding, certain dogs have got more propensity or ability to deal with pressure. Some have got more ability to deal with stress. Some are easygoing, some are edgy, some are hyperactive. And then to complicate this, we often pick breeds based on what we want them to be. And I'll cover this a little bit more later on, but some dogs are bred to be potentially indoors. Other dogs are bred to work. Other dogs are bred to be a hybrid of indoor and outdoor. Now, all of these situations that we put the dog in need to be understood in the context of what was the dog designed to do, because based on its genetics, it will only have a certain ability to deal with so much pressure naturally without us then training the dog to do different responses that are more suitable for what we want the dog to do. So understanding that the breed of dog has a potential to have more complications in terms of separation related behavior. The next thing that complicates this, or that produces a behavior response, is our living environment. Now, whether we're living in an apartment, a townhouse, or a detached house, our living environment can significantly impact on the dog's independence. So those people that typically have apartments, most people with apartments, from my experience, have dogs which have got the highest degree of separation related behavior, simply because the dogs don't have an ability to get away from us, because there isn't a backyard, and everything about the dog's interaction is driven about the environment that we and the dogs share. People with townhouses, a little bit better off than apartments, because sometimes townhouses have a little bit of a small backyard, and people tend to use that backyard a little bit more than a balcony in an apartment. So the dogs have a little bit more of an ability to actually get away from us and to learn how to be independent. And people that live in full-blown houses with a backyard have got the best potential to have a good balance between indoor and outdoor, and have much more of an independent dog. Now, I'll go through how this affects training down with regards to the dog a little bit further in this presentation. Human odor. Now, this is a real biggie. Human odor is potentially the strongest trigger, or the strongest driver for any kind of dependency behavior. Because dogs are pack animals, they are driven significantly by odor. I'm a scent detection dog trainer, so just about everything that dogs do has a foundation in odor. And because dogs love being on couches and love being on beds and love being near things that smell of us, the common ingredient is the closer they are to human odor, the stronger the dependency becomes, and stronger the separation issues are when the dog is separated from that. So we'll talk a bit more in the following videos about how human odor in terms of couches and beds can significantly impact dogs going forward. Owner lifestyle, whether the dog is an indoor dog or an outdoor dog or a mixture, is important in terms of how much time the dog spends away from humans on a day-to-day basis. So those of us that have dogs predominantly as an indoor dog most of the time are effectively on a hiding to nothing, because they can't get away from us. Dogs that are indoor and outdoor, well, depending on when they're inside and when they're outside, has an impact of how the dogs actually feel. If they're simply put outside when we're at work and brought back in when we come home, that's a bit of a problem in itself. And if the dogs are predominantly outdoors the whole time and they get brought in, well, that has a different impact on separation related behavior. So understanding how our lifestyle, whether the dogs are inside, outdoors, or whether there's a mixture of both, has an impact on how the dogs will tend to deal with separation issues going forward. Our way of life. Now, this is a real biggie, because the extent of routine that we have as owners impacts our dogs. What I've found in all my years of training is dogs that live in environments that have very easygoing and fluid situations where routine is minimal are dogs that tend to deal with separation issues the best, because life is pretty flexible and easygoing. People that have pretty strict routines because they work really strict hours tend to end up having the worst dogs, because routine produces expectation. If expectation isn't met, it produces frustration. So the problems that we actually have is that the way we live our life has a follow-on effect with our dogs, and that can be problematic in itself with regards to how they deal with separation issues. Independence of the dog. Now, this is a really important one. How much emphasis is placed on teaching the dog to be alone? Now, we buy dogs because we want them to be part of our dynamic, part of our family, and we want them to share our space as much as we can. The problem with this is, unless we train the dogs to be independent, they're continuously in and around us, and being pack animals, they will suffer when we're not around. So understanding that independence is an important thing that we need to produce or generate or instill in our dogs is an important thing to help them deal with separation issues. The last one is training and problem solving skills. How has the dog been trained to understand stress and pressure? Now, this is really important, because most of us train our dogs, but we don't train them in ways that actually help them deal with pressure and stress. Most of the training is superficial, and the dogs don't actually learn as a byproduct of day-to-day living with us how to remove pressure and how to remove stress as part of problem solving on a day-to-day basis. So understanding that we can help the dogs simply by how we teach them simple obedience skills and how they can leverage off that to deal with pressure is a really important thing. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. I hope you found it informative. As always, if you have any questions on any of the content, by all means leave me a comment and I'll get back to you. Also, if there are any particular subjects that you might want me to make a video about, please drop me a comment and I'll see if I can make one for you. Thanks again.